This is why you should always watch what you say in public. In the late 1970s, a man began breaking into homes in order to assault the families inside of them. After dozens of attacks and no suspects in custody, the citizens were totally on edge, so the police decide to host this town hall meeting so they can discuss the situation out in public. During the meeting, a local man stands up and says, "I would totally kick that guy's ass if he came anywhere near my wife." Then, in a crazy, ironic turn of events, that angry man and his wife become the next victims. Following their assault, the attacker completely changes his behavior. He goes from kind of petty home invader to full-blown serial killer, targeting only married men and their wives. When decades later, police finally identify Joseph DeAngelo as the killer, as they're going through old photos from the case, they make a startling discovery about his motives. DeAngelo had attended that town hall meeting. Yes, the picture at the end is real. In 1876, a woman from a very prominent family in Paris goes missing. After years go by and no one has a clue what happened to this woman, friends and family ultimately mourn her death and move on. 25 years later, and this anonymous letter shows up on the Attorney General's desk, claiming that the missing woman's family had a secret. Intrigued by the letter, the police go to the family's home, show it to them, and ask to search the property, to which they say, "Go for it." They search, they don't find anything, but on the way out, they notice something very peculiar. At the end of some stairs was a door that was padlocked shut. When the family refused to open it, the police break it down and make a horrifying discovery. Cowering on a rotten straw mattress in a pitch-black room was the missing woman, now 50 years old and extremely malnourished. Her mother had imprisoned her there after they had fought over her boyfriend, and she had not seen sunlight or another human being in 25 years. Yes, this really did happen. In 2015, a man woke up to a strange post-it note sitting on his desk. On it was a to-do list that he didn't recognize in handwriting that didn't look like his. Since he was up late the night before doing some work, he assumed he must have written out the list when he was half asleep and kind of forgot about it, so he just crumples it up and throws it away. 2 weeks later, he wakes up to dozens of these post-it notes all over his wall, and they're all blank except for one that, in the same weird handwriting, says, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you." Now feeling totally freaked out that some crazy person is crawling around his apartment at night, he starts looking for signs of a break-in, but there aren't any. Instead of calling the police, he shares his experience on Reddit asking for help, and one user's comment literally saves his life. Turns out the man was writing the notes to himself and then forgetting, because his brain was slowly dying due to a carbon monoxide leak that was only discovered because a user suggested he install a detector. This is why you should always be scared of clowns. In 2004, a babysitter had just sat down to watch TV before the parents got back when she noticed something. In the corner of the room was a large clown statue that, no matter how she positioned herself, seemed like it was staring right at her. As she's looking at it, the father calls to check in on the kids. She tells him everything is fine, and right before they're about to hang up, she says, "Why do you have a huge clown statue in your TV room?" There was silence on the phone, and then the father just says, "We don't own a clown statue." She immediately drops the phone, runs upstairs, gets the kids, runs outside, calls the cops. Cops go in and come out with this guy. As the police are taking the clown away, one of the officers comes over to the girl and with a very grim look on his face just says, "We found him underneath one of the kids' beds. He was holding a sharpened screwdriver." Sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. In 2010, a couple renting a cabin in the middle of the woods finds the guest logbook tucked underneath the bed in the bedroom. After reading through it, they decide to call the cops. The final 5 entries are all by the same man. The first 2 are just talking about how great it is to be on vacation with his girlfriend. Then it starts to get weird. In the 3rd entry, he describes a stranger lurking in the tree line that doesn't respond to his waves. In the 4th entry, he hears knocking on the windows in the middle of the night, but no one's there. In his 5th and final entry, his handwriting is barely legible, and it just says, "It's in the bathroom, we're going to die." The police show up and find the girlfriend's body in the basement. Next to her body was her purse, and in her purse was her phone. When they open it up, they see that she texted her mother one last time, and it just says, "Mike's starting to act crazy. I think he's off his meds again." This is why you should be careful what you put in the mail. In 2015, a man was asked by his neighbor to collect his mail while he was gone for a few weeks. A few days later, a large package arrives on his neighbor's front porch. The man can barely lift it, but gets over to his garage where he accidentally drops it and hears something break inside. Hoping his neighbor would think the damage occurred en route, he closes his squeaky garage door and forgets about it. But over the next couple of days, whatever was in that package started to smell so bad that he decides to open it up. Inside were two very important finds: his neighbor, who was dead, and a camera that was still recording. The police bring the man in for questioning and show him what was on the camera inside the box. It starts with his neighbor talking to the camera about how excited he is to mail himself home for his YouTube channel. Then, police fast forward to the very end where they see that the neighbor is now sleeping in the box, and then suddenly gets dropped and you hear a crack, and that's his neck breaking. And then you hear a squeaky garage door close. If you make it to the end, I'm sorry. In 2007, a woman was lying awake in her hotel bed when she started hearing a kid run up and down the hall laughing and making tons of noise. She considered going out and telling the kid to be quiet, but eventually just said whatever and fell asleep. The next morning, she got up and asked her teenage daughter, who was staying in the room next door, if she had heard the kid, and she said yes, it was so annoying. That night, the woman is back in bed trying to sleep when once again she hears the kid in the hall. Now feeling pretty annoyed herself, she starts walking to the front door to get a better listen when the footsteps stop right in front of her door and she hears the kid playing with the do not disturb sign. She leans into the peephole to get a better look, but the kid's gone. So she steps into the hallway and looks down the hall, and there's the kid at the far end, just standing there perfectly still. This is why you might not want to eat deer meat. In late 2019, a man and his grandfather were out hunting when they spotted something way off in the distance that just didn't seem right. A deer was howling and then lowering its antlers and charging forward like a battering ram as if it was fighting with another animal. But when they crept closer, they could tell that the deer was all alone and something was definitely wrong with it. The deer was repeatedly ramming its head into a tree, and then finally one of its antlers breaks off and it kneels down and starts chewing on the antler. As they're watching in horror, the deer in a sudden lurching movement gets up on its hind legs and then walks like a human into the nearby lake, goes under, and does not resurface. Turns out the deer had chronic wasting disease, which is a new, highly contagious neurological disorder that drills holes in the brains of those affected and leads to a distinct lack of fear and awareness and is always fatal. And now, scientists are concerned it might spread to humans in 2020. This is why you always say yes to tandoori chicken. In 2012, a high school tutor and her student stayed up so late one night studying that by the time they were done, the buses had stopped running. Without another way home, the student asked if he could stay the night at her place. Reluctantly, she agreed. When they got back to the apartment, she fell asleep on her bed and he fell asleep on a blanket next to her bed on the ground. A few hours later, she wakes up to the boy standing awkwardly in the middle of the room with a very strange look on his face. She asks him, "What's wrong?" He looks at her and says, "I'm really hungry. Let's go get some tandoori chicken." Confused, she says, "It's 2 a.m. Just get a snack in the cupboard." And he grabs her by the arm and he says, "No, we are getting tandoori chicken right now." And he yanks her from the bed. Feeling totally caught off guard by this whole situation, she goes into the hall with the boy, and as soon as the door shuts behind them, she can tell that he is terrified. He looks at her and just says, "I'm not actually hungry. When I woke up, there was someone under your bed." If someone offers you this, walk away. In 2016, a man was staying at his friend's cabin in the woods when he decided to go for an evening stroll. A little ways down the trail, he hears someone call out from behind his neighbor's house. He looks up and he sees this skinny guy pop out from behind the building who starts waving frantically at him to come over. Worried this guy could be in trouble, the man takes off running to assist, but when he gets close enough, the neighbor just offers him a fistful of Slim Jims and starts talking about how much he hates his wife. Sensing there was something wrong with this guy, he says no thank you to the Slim Jims and walks away. The next day, the man calls his friend who owned the cabin to ask him what the deal was with his weirdo neighbor. There was silence on the phone, and then his friend just says, "I don't have any neighbors." The police are called, and it turns out his neighbor was really some lunatic who had recently killed his wife and had been hiding out in the abandoned cabin next door. This is why you should never stay in sketchy motels. In 2005, a young woman on a solo road trip across the country decided to stop for the night. The first place she sees is the Mountaintop Motel. It looked pretty cheap, but she was tired, so she said good enough. The check-in guy eyed her up and down very uncomfortably and then asked her if she was traveling alone. She ignores the question, pays for her room, and then walks away with the key. When she gets inside her room and sees there are literally cockroaches in her bed, she says nope and decides to sleep in her car in the parking lot. Around 3 a.m., she wakes up to see the check-in guy using his own keys to get into the motel room she was supposed to be in. A few minutes later, he storms out and slams the door and starts walking towards her car. Terrified, she hides under her blanket as the man tries to open her car doors but can't and walks away. She speeds off and calls her friend and asks her to look up the address of Mountaintop Motel so she can give it to police. Her friend's quiet for a second and then just says, "The Mountaintop Motel closed a week ago." This is why you should always change your locks. In 2017, a college girl woke up from a nightmare drenched in sweat and decided to rinse off before going back to sleep. She propped her phone on a shelf, turned on some music, and then hopped in the shower. A few minutes later, she reaches for her phone to change the song, but stops suddenly. Reflected on her phone's screen was a person standing in the middle of her bathroom facing the shower. She somehow kept her composure, turned the water to scalding hot, and then ripped open the curtain and sprayed the intruder in the face. As they howled in pain, she ran past them to her kitchen to get her butcher's knife. In a panic, she can't find her knife, so she just runs out of the apartment and calls the police. The police go in and come out with a crazy-looking woman in handcuffs. One of the officers comes over to the girl and says she used to live here and she had copies of your keys. Then he pauses and looks down and brings up a clear evidence bag that contained her butcher's knife, and he says, "Looks like she wanted her apartment back." This is why you should always be scared of clowns. In 2004, a babysitter had just sat down to watch TV before the parents got back when she noticed something. In the corner of the room was a large clown statue that, no matter how she positioned herself, seemed like it was staring right at her. As she's looking at it, the father calls to check in on the kids. She tells him everything is fine, and right before they're about to hang up, she says, "Why do you have a huge clown statue in your TV room?" There was silence on the phone, and then the father just says, "We don't own a clown statue." She immediately drops the phone, runs upstairs, gets the kids, runs outside, calls the cops. Cops go in and come out with this guy. As the police are taking the clown away, one of the officers comes over to the girl and with a very grim look on his face just says, "We found him underneath one of the kids' beds. He was holding a sharpened screwdriver." Yes, this really did happen. In 2015, a man woke up to a strange post-it note sitting on his desk. On it was a to-do list that he didn't recognize in handwriting that didn't look like his. Since he was up late the night before doing some work, he assumed he must have written out the list when he was half asleep and kind of forgot about it, so he just crumples it up and throws it away. 2 weeks later, he wakes up to dozens of these post-it notes all over his wall, and they're all blank except for one that, in the same weird handwriting, says, "Our landlord isn't letting me talk to you." Now feeling totally freaked out that some crazy person is crawling around his apartment at night, he starts looking for signs of a break-in, but there aren't any. Instead of calling the police, he shares his experience on Reddit asking for help, and one user's comment literally saves his life. Turns out the man was writing the notes to himself and then forgetting, because his brain was slowly dying due to a carbon monoxide leak that was only discovered because a user suggested he install a detector. This is why you should always trust your gut. In the early 1970s, a college student decided to hitchhike his way home after class. A car pulls up, a man offers him a ride, and he climbs in. As soon as the car started moving, the student felt totally uneasy, like something was wrong but he couldn't quite place it. Without saying anything, he waited till the next time they slowed down and he flung the door open and ran away. 2 years later, he's flicking through TV channels when he comes across this special interview with a death row inmate. And it's just the audio recording, so he hears the interviewer ask the inmate, "Why did you remove all the door handles inside of your car?" The man just goes, "Well, the first time I tried to kill someone, I picked up a college hitchhiker who got smart at some point and jumped out of my car. So, lesson learned, remove all the door handles." When they showed his picture, the student knew immediately that he was supposed to be the first victim of John Wayne Gacy, aka the Killer Clown, who had killed over 30 men and boys in his clown room and stuffed them into his basement. This is why I'm proud to be an American. In 2014, a team of Navy SEALs were ambushed in broad daylight in a bad town in Afghanistan. They managed to fight off the attack, but by the time the shooting stopped, they were low on supplies and needed to leave. As they coordinated their exit strategy, a drone overhead picked up a group of men hiding in a field near the city's exit. Fearing these might be enemy combatants preparing for another attack, a few of the SEALs stepped aside to go have a better look. As they crept down an alleyway, all hell broke loose when 2 enemy grenades came hurtling over the wall and detonated at their feet. 2 of the SEALs were immediately incapacitated, but luckily their teammates jumped into action, repeatedly exposing themselves to enemy fire in order to save their lives. Without their teammates' bravery that night, those 2 men could have died. And I know because I was one of those 2 men. So on this Memorial Day, I am forever grateful to my teammates who saved my life and to the Gold Star families who carry an unthinkable burden. Thank you. This is why you should never watch my videos before going to bed. In 1986, a young girl opens her closet to find a man wearing a dress and holding an axe. He grabs her and ties her up, and then walks around the house and does the same thing to the rest of her family. While the guy is ransacking their house, one of the kids breaks free, runs next door, and tells his neighbor. The neighbor calls the cops show up, the family's saved, but the guy is nowhere to be found. The family leaves the house and stays with relatives in hopes that they'll catch this guy before they have to go back. But after a few weeks, they haven't caught him, there aren't any leads, and they say, you know what, we'll go back to our house anyways. As the family's pulling back into their driveway, the father looks up at one of the windows and sees for a split second the head of the man with the dress in their bedroom. They call the police, who go in and find pennies glued to the ceiling and weird writing all over the house, but they can't find this crazy guy. Until one of the officers found a secret crawl space in the basement, where psychotic killer Danny LaPlante had been living for 2 months. This is why you should always watch videos to the end. In 2003, a woman came home to her apartment to see that her door was unlocked. She went inside, nothing was missing, so she assumed she must have left it open. When it happened a few more times, but still nothing was missing in her apartment, she went out and got a camera, set it up in her apartment aimed at the front door. The next day, her door was unlocked, so she reviewed the footage. She watches in horror as late in the night, her front door opens and in walks this tall, creepy man who looks around and then walks towards her bedroom off camera. She immediately sprints out of her apartment and calls the police, who show up and tell her to go back in her apartment and just try to stay calm, and that they would put an officer right outside her door so she's safe. As she's sitting on the bed, totally traumatized, she realizes something. She only saw him enter her apartment on that video. She doesn't know if he actually left. As she's sitting there, she feels breathing on her ankles. She runs out, the cop comes in, and he finds the tall, creepy man under the bed holding a knife and a camera. Unless you've heard this story, there's no way you could have guessed what was on that ship. In 2012, an old Russian cruise liner was being towed to the Caribbean to be used for scrap when the tow line snapped. They tried to recover it, but it drifted into international waters and everybody just kind of assumed it would sink, so they said, forget about it. It didn't sink, because a year later they got a GPS signal from the unmanned ship showing that it had drifted nearly 2/3 of the way across the Atlantic and was now poised to strike the British coastline. At first, British authorities were not concerned with the damage this ship might cause to their coastline until scientists revealed what was on the ship.
It was being towed to the Caribbean last year when it came loose during a storm. It's now feared to be infested with cannibal rats on board, who, lacking a food source, have turned on each other.
Cannibal rats? That's pretty shocking. But not nearly as shocking as it was for me to see 4 million on my page. Thank you. Once you hear why he did this, it will change the way you look at strangers. In 2018, a woman was out for a walk in the blistering cold when she saw a teen girl coming towards her wearing just pajamas and oversized shoes. Turns out it was 13-year-old missing person Jamie Close, and boy did she have a terrifying story to tell. 87 days earlier, a man had broken into her home in the middle of the night, killed her parents, and then taken her prisoner. He brought her 70 miles away to his house where she was kept under a bed and largely forgotten about. She was just there for no apparent reason. When her captor left one night, she managed to escape, and that's when she ran into this woman on the road. Jamie's captor, 21-year-old Jake Patterson, was quickly found, and he immediately confessed. And this is why he did it. On his way to work one day, he stops behind a school bus and he sees a girl get on. He doesn't know anything about her, and he decides, I'm going to kill her family and I'm going to take her. He had no motive, he had no criminal history. This was truly random.